The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors that had witnessed countless royal moments throughout history. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood silently in her private sitting room, her hands trembling slightly as she held a letter that would change everything. The official seal at the bottom bore news that she had been dreading for months, yet somehow always knew would come. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from the Queen. He didn't need to ask what the letter contained. The expression on his wife's face told him everything. After 15 years of marriage and a lifetime of service to the crown, they both understood that some duties came with a price that extended far beyond personal sacrifice. The couple had always known this day might arrive, but knowing and experiencing were two entirely different things. Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it on the antique writing desk that had belonged to Diana, William's mother. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that this news would come to rest on furniture that had once belonged to someone who had faced her own impossible choices between duty and personal happiness. "The children," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. George, Charlotte, and Louis were still asleep in their rooms down the hallway, blissfully unaware that their parents had just received news that would reshape their entire family's future. The weight of protecting their innocence while preparing them for what lay ahead felt overwhelming. William moved closer to his wife, understanding without words the storm of emotions she was experiencing. They had built their relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and an unwavering commitment to their roles as working royals. But they had also built it on love, laughter, and the simple dream of giving their children as normal a childhood as possible, within the confines of their extraordinary circumstances. The morning light continued to shift across the room, illuminating family photographs scattered across various surfaces, pictures of holidays in Norfolk, birthday celebrations, and quiet family moments that the public rarely saw. Each image represented memories they had carefully cultivated away from the constant scrutiny of cameras and public expectations. Catherine walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where she could see the early morning joggers and dog walkers beginning their daily routines, normal people living normal lives, something she had once taken for granted during her university years with William, before the weight of crowns and constitutional requirements became the backdrop of their daily existence. The decision they now faced wasn't one that could be made lightly or quickly. It would require careful consideration of not just their own desires, but the impact on the monarchy, the Commonwealth, and the millions of people who looked to them for stability and continuity. Yet beneath all these grand considerations lay the simple truth of two people who had found love in an extraordinary situation and were now being asked to choose between that love and everything they had sworn to uphold. William joined her at the window, and together they watched the world wake up beyond the palace walls. In a few hours, their staff would arrive. Their official schedule would begin, and they would once again become the public figures that millions around the world admired and followed. But for these precious quiet moments, they were simply a husband and wife facing an impossible decision together. The letter on the desk seemed to pulse with significance in the morning light, its contents representing not just a personal crisis, but a constitutional moment that would be studied and debated for generations to come. Neither William nor Catherine could have imagined when they first met as students that their love story would one day require such profound sacrifices from both of them. 3 days passed in careful deliberation, during which William and Catherine maintained their public schedules, while privately wrestling with the monumental decision before them. The Queen had requested a private audience, and they found themselves walking through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, each step echoing with the weight of centuries of royal tradition. Queen Elizabeth sat in her private study, surrounded by the portraits of monarchs who had faced their own moments of crisis throughout British history. Her expression was both understanding and resolute, as she gestured for the couple to take seats across from her ornate desk. The conversation that followed would remain private, but those close to the royal family later described it as the most emotionally charged discussion the monarch had experienced since the abdication crisis of her uncle decades earlier. "Duty and love need not always be enemies," the Queen had said, her voice carrying the wisdom of 70 years on the throne. But even she acknowledged that sometimes the institution required sacrifices that seemed almost unbearable to those called upon to make them. The constitutional implications of their situation were complex, involving not just British law but the delicate relationships with Commonwealth nations that looked to the royal family for continuity and stability. Catherine found herself thinking about her own journey from a middle-class family in Berkshire to the very heart of the British establishment. She remembered her mother's advice on her wedding day about never losing sight of who she was beneath the titles and responsibilities. That young woman seemed like a lifetime ago, yet her core values remained unchanged, even as her circumstances had transformed beyond recognition. The media speculation had already begun, though the palace press office worked tirelessly to maintain privacy during this sensitive time. Photographers gathered outside royal residences, and royal correspondents filed daily reports analyzing every public appearance for signs of stress or tension. The couple's body language during official engagements was scrutinized frame by frame, with experts offering opinions about the state of their marriage and their commitment to royal duties. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, William and Catherine spent long evenings talking with their children about love, responsibility, and the sometimes difficult choices that adults must make. George, as the eldest and second in line to the throne, seemed to understand more than his parents realized. His questions were thoughtful and showed a maturity beyond his years, perhaps inherited from generations of royals who had learned early that their lives would never be entirely their own. Charlotte displayed her characteristic determination, declaring that whatever her parents decided, the family would face it together. Her fierce loyalty reminded Catherine of William's own protective instincts, traits that had drawn them together during their university courtship and sustained them through the challenges of royal life. Young Louis, still largely oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued his cheerful routine of school and play, providing moments of levity that reminded his parents of what truly mattered, beyond constitutional requirements and public expectations. The couple began to make discreet preparations for multiple scenarios, understanding that their decision would trigger a series of constitutional procedures that had rarely been tested in modern times. Legal experts were consulted privately, and historical precedents were researched to understand the full implications of their choice. Catherine spent hours in the palace library, reading about other royal couples who had faced similar crossroads throughout history. Some had chosen duty over personal happiness, while others had chosen love over crown. Each story offered insights, but none provided easy answers for their unique situation in the 21st century. The weight of representing not just themselves, but the future of the monarchy, pressed heavily on both of them. They understood that their decision would be debated in Parliament, analyzed by constitutional scholars, and remembered by historians long after they were gone. Yet beneath all these grand considerations, they remained two people deeply in love, trying to find a path that honored both their hearts and their responsibilities to the nation they had pledged to serve. The turning point came during a private weekend at Anmer Hall, their country home in Norfolk, where they had always found peace away from the pressures of royal life. Walking through the gardens where their children had learned to ride bicycles and climb trees, William and Catherine finally spoke the words that had been weighing on their hearts for weeks. Catherine was the first to voice what they both knew deep down. Standing beside the old oak tree where they had carved their initials years ago, she spoke about the woman she had been before becoming a duchess, and the dreams she had quietly set aside for the greater good. Her voice was steady, but William could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes as she talked about the life they might have had in different circumstances. William's response surprised even him with its emotional honesty. The future king spoke not about duty or constitutional obligations, but about love and the recognition that some sacrifices were too great even for the crown. He talked about watching his father struggle for decades with similar choices, and his determination not to repeat patterns that had caused so much pain in previous generations. Their children joined them in the garden, and what followed was perhaps the most important family conversation in recent royal history. George asked direct questions about what would happen to the monarchy, showing an understanding of his position that both impressed and saddened his parents. Charlotte worried about whether they would still be a family, while Louis simply wanted to know if they could still have their weekly movie nights together. The family spent the evening looking through photo albums, remembering holidays, birthdays, and quiet moments that had defined their years together. Each picture told the story of a family that had found happiness despite extraordinary circumstances, but also revealed the growing strain of trying to balance personal desires with public obligations. That night, after the children were asleep, William and Catherine made their decision. It wasn't reached through constitutional analysis or historical precedent, but through the simple recognition that their love for each other and their family had to come first, even if it meant disappointing millions of people who looked to them for leadership and stability. The practical implications of their choice began to unfold immediately. Phone calls were made to senior palace officials, constitutional experts, and family members. Each conversation was difficult, filled with expressions of understanding mixed with profound sadness about what would be lost. The Queen's response was particularly emotional, as she recognized that their decision represented both a personal tragedy and a constitutional watershed. Plans were put in motion for what palace officials privately called the transition, a carefully orchestrated process that would allow William and Catherine to step back from their roles, while ensuring minimal disruption to the monarchy and the institutions they represented. Every detail had to be considered, from security arrangements to the impact on charities and organizations that depended on their patronage. The couple began the painful process of informing close friends and family members personally, wanting them to hear the news directly, rather than through official announcements. Each conversation was heart-wrenching, as people who had supported them throughout their royal journey struggled to understand how love could require such dramatic sacrifices. Catherine found herself thinking about all the people who had worked so hard to support their royal duties over the years. Staff members who had dedicated their careers to the royal household, charity workers who had relied on royal patronage to further their causes, and ordinary citizens who had found inspiration in their example of service and commitment. William grappled with the weight of disappointing not just his grandmother and father, but an entire nation that had watched him grow up and expected him to follow the path laid out by centuries of tradition. The knowledge that he was breaking a chain of succession that stretched back over 1,000 years felt almost overwhelming at times. Yet beneath all these concerns lay a profound sense of relief that they had finally acknowledged what their hearts had been telling them for months. Sometimes the greatest act of love requires the courage to choose happiness over duty, even when that choice comes with consequences that will echo through history. The weeks following their private decision were among the most challenging in the couple's marriage, as they worked with palace officials to manage what historians would later call the most significant constitutional change in modern British history. Every detail of their departure had to be carefully planned to minimize disruption to the monarchy while respecting their need for privacy and dignity. Catherine threw herself into completing her final royal engagements with a grace and professionalism that impressed even longtime palace staff. Each appearance carried extra emotional weight, knowing it might be her last in an official capacity. The children's hospital she had championed for years received a particularly moving farewell visit, where she spent extra time with young patients and their families, trying to ensure the program she had started would continue without her direct involvement. William struggled with informing the military units where he served as colonel-in-chief, knowing that his departure would disappoint service members who had looked to him for leadership and continuity. His final visits to RAF bases and naval facilities were marked by a solemnity that reflected the gravity of what was being lost, even as those who knew him best expressed private understanding of his impossible position. The most difficult conversations came with Harry and Meghan, whose own departure from royal duties had paved some of the procedural groundwork for William and Catherine's situation. The brothers' relationship, already strained by previous disagreements, found new common ground in their shared experience of choosing family happiness over royal obligations. Their private reconciliation provided one bright spot during an otherwise emotionally exhausting period. King Charles, newly crowned and still adjusting to his role as monarch, faced the unprecedented situation of his heir, a parent voluntarily stepping away from the succession. Their father-son conversations were reported to be both painful and ultimately healing, as Charles recognized that his own struggles with balancing duty and personal happiness had influenced his son's perspective on royal life. The media speculation reached fever pitch as rumors of significant changes within the royal family began to circulate. Palace press officers worked around the clock to manage the story, while protecting the family's privacy during their transition period. International media camped outside royal residences, and royal correspondents filed hourly updates speculating about everything from health crises to marital problems. Meanwhile, constitutional scholars debated the legal implications of William's decision, examining precedents that stretched back centuries, while acknowledging that modern circumstances required new solutions. Parliament was quietly briefed on the situation, and senior politicians from all parties were consulted about the potential impact on Britain's relationship with Commonwealth nations and its constitutional monarchy. The children's education became a particular concern, as their future roles would change dramatically, depending on their parents' final decision. Private tutors were arranged to help them understand not just what was happening to their family, but the historical significance of their parents' choice and how it might affect their own futures. Catherine spent long hours with her own family, particularly her mother Carol, discussing how to help the children maintain their sense of identity and purpose regardless of their titles or positions in the succession. The Middleton family's support proved crucial during this transition, offering the kind of unconditional love and acceptance that royal life often made difficult to find. Security arrangements required complete restructuring, as the couple's protection needs would change dramatically once they stepped away from official duties. Scotland Yard worked with international security services to develop new protocols that would ensure their safety while allowing them greater freedom of movement and privacy than they had enjoyed for over a decade. Financial independence became another crucial consideration, as stepping away from royal duties also meant giving up the income and support that came with their positions. William and Catherine began exploring ways to support themselves and their children without relying on taxpayer funding or using their royal connections. Inappropriately, the emotional toll of these preparations was evident to those closest to them, despite their public composure during official engagements. Friends described private moments of doubt and sadness as the couple grappled with the magnitude of what they were leaving behind and the uncertainty of what lay ahead for their family's future. The announcement came on a crisp autumn morning, delivered simultaneously to Parliament, Commonwealth governments, and the public through carefully coordinated statements that had taken weeks to craft. The words were simple but profound, explaining that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge had made the difficult decision to step back from their roles in the line of succession, to focus on their family and personal happiness. Within minutes of the announcement, news websites crashed under the volume of traffic, social media exploded with reactions ranging from shock to support, and news channels around the world interrupted regular programming to cover what many called the most significant royal story since the abdication of Edward VIII. The carefully worded statement emphasized the couple's continued love and respect for the monarchy, while making clear that their decision was final and irreversible. International reaction was swift and varied. Commonwealth nations that had grown particularly fond of William and Catherine expressed disappointment while respecting their choice. Canadian Prime Minister's statement reflected the sentiments of many when he praised their years of service while acknowledging that personal happiness must sometimes take precedence over public duty. The British public's response was more complex, with polling showing a nation genuinely divided between those who felt betrayed by what they saw as an abandonment of duty and those who admired the couple's courage in choosing love over obligation. Many drew parallels to Edward VIII's abdication, though supporters argued that this situation was fundamentally different because it involved a family making choices together rather than a king choosing personal desire over constitutional responsibility. Religious leaders from various faiths weighed in on the moral dimensions of the decision, with the Archbishop of Canterbury offering a nuanced reflection on the sometimes competing demands of duty and love. His statement acknowledged the profound difficulty of the choice while emphasizing the Christian values of family and personal integrity that had guided the couple's decision-making process. Inside Buckingham Palace, staff members who had worked with William and Catherine for years struggled with their own emotions about the departure. Many had formed genuine personal relationships with the couple and their children, and the knowledge that these working relationships would end created a sense of loss that went beyond professional disappointment. The children's school was briefed about the change in their circumstances, and teachers worked carefully to help George, Charlotte, and Lewis understand how their daily lives might change while ensuring they felt supported during the transition. Classmates' parents were asked to respect the family's privacy as they adjusted to their new situation. Catherine's final official engagement was at a women's shelter she had supported for years, where she delivered an emotional farewell address about the importance of following one's heart, even when the path seems uncertain. Her words, though officially about the charity's work, were clearly meant as a broader message about courage and authenticity that resonated far beyond the immediate audience. William's last official duty was a private meeting with military leaders, where he formally resigned his honorary positions and thanked those who had served with him throughout his military career. The meeting was described by attendees as deeply moving, with several senior officers expressing their understanding of his choice while acknowledging their personal disappointment at losing his leadership. The family's final royal engagement together was a private service of Thanksgiving at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where they had celebrated their wedding over a decade earlier. Attended only by immediate family and closest friends, the service was both a farewell and a blessing for their future journey, together as a family choosing their own path. Queen Elizabeth's final official act regarding their departure was to issue new letters patent, restructuring the line of succession, and formally recognizing William and Catherine's wishes to be removed from official duties. The documents, signed in private ceremony, attended only by senior members of the royal family, marked the end of one chapter in their lives and the beginning of something entirely new. The couple spent their last night in Kensington Palace walking through rooms that had been their home for so many years, remembering both the joyful and challenging moments they had experienced within those walls. Each room held memories of their children's laughter, state dinners, private family moments, and the countless hours they had spent fulfilling their royal obligations while building their life together. The morning of their departure from royal life dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the bittersweet nature of the occasion. William and Catherine woke early in their private apartments, knowing that when they went to sleep that night, they would no longer be working members of the British royal family but simply a married couple, starting a new chapter of their lives together. The children had been prepared for this day over many weeks of gentle conversations, but the reality of leaving their childhood home still proved emotional for all three. George, Charlotte, and Louis each said goodbye to their favorite spaces in the palace, from the garden where they had played countless games to the library where Catherine had read them bedtime stories during quiet family evenings. Palace staff formed informal receiving lines in the corridors, wanting to say personal farewells to a family they had served with dedication and genuine affection. Many of these relationships had grown beyond professional obligations into real friendships, making the goodbyes particularly difficult for everyone involved. Catherine was seen wiping away tears as she hugged the housekeeper who had helped her navigate royal protocol during her early years as a duchess. The final family breakfast in the palace dining room was a quiet affair, with conversation focusing on practical details of their move rather than the emotional significance of what was happening. William and Catherine had worked hard to maintain as much normalcy as possible for their children, even as their world was fundamentally changing around them. Security teams coordinated the family's departure with military precision, ensuring their privacy was protected during the transition to their new life. The route to their temporary residence was kept secret from the media, allowing them to leave without the circus of cameras and reporters that had documented so many of their public moments over the years. Their new home, a comfortable but modest house in the Cotswolds, represented everything they had dreamed of during their years of royal service. It had a large garden where the children could play freely, neighbors who valued privacy over proximity to celebrity, and the kind of anonymity that would allow them to rebuild their family life on their own terms. The first weeks of their new life were both liberating and disorienting. Simple activities like grocery shopping or taking the children to school required adjustment after years of having every public appearance carefully planned and protected. Catherine later described the strange joy of being able to browse a bookshop without causing a media frenzy or disrupting other customers' peaceful shopping experience. William struggled more with the transition, having been born into royal life and never knowing anything else until now. The absence of daily briefings, official schedules, and constant obligations left him temporarily at loose ends as he worked to define his new identity. Beyond the roles and titles he had carried since birth, the children adapted, with the resilience that youngsters often display, quickly making new friends at their local school and embracing the freedom to be ordinary students, rather than young royals constantly in the public eye. Their teachers reported that all three seemed happier and more relaxed once they settled into their new routine. Public interest in their new life remained intense, but the family worked with media lawyers to establish clear boundaries about privacy and protection for their children. William and Catherine were willing to accept some level of public curiosity about their choice, but they were determined to shield George, Charlotte, and Louis from the kind of intrusive coverage that had marked their own royal childhood's. Financial independence became a reality as William began work with a private foundation focused on conservation and mental health, while Catherine explored opportunities to continue her advocacy work through non-royal channels. Both were careful to ensure their post-royal careers could not be seen as trading on their former positions inappropriately. The couple's relationship, freed from the constant pressure of public scrutiny and royal protocol, seemed to flourish in ways that surprised even their closest friends. Without the weight of constitutional obligations, they were able to rediscover the easy companionship and shared humor that had first brought them together as university students many years earlier. Evening conversations that once focused on official duties and public obligations now centered on homework help, weekend plans, and the simple pleasure of being together as a family without guards and staff, or the ever-present awareness that their every word and action might become public knowledge. 1 year after their departure from royal life, William and Catherine stood in their garden watching their children play freely without security details or protocol officers managing their every movement. The transformation in their family dynamic was remarkable to anyone who had known them during their royal years. When even simple family activities required extensive planning and coordination, the public's attitude toward their decision had evolved considerably over the months since their departure. Initial criticism had largely given way to a grudging respect for their courage in choosing family happiness over institutional obligation. Opinion polls showed that while many still wished they had remained in their royal roles, most people understood and supported their right to make such a personal choice. Catherine had found particular fulfillment in her new role as a private advocate for children's mental health, working with smaller organizations that could never have accessed royal patronage, but were doing groundbreaking work in communities across Britain. Without the constraints of royal neutrality, she was able to speak more directly about issues she cared about deeply. William's work with environmental causes had taken on new dimensions now that he could advocate more freely for policies and changes that might have been politically sensitive during his royal years. His expertise and passion for conservation were unchanged, but his ability to express them had expanded significantly without constitutional limitations. The children's adjustment continued to surprise and delight their parents. George had developed a love for mathematics that might never have been nurtured amid royal obligations. Charlotte had discovered a talent for art that flourished in her new environment, and Louis had become an enthusiastic football player on his local team. Their relationship with the wider royal family remained complex, but loving. Regular private visits with the Queen had been emotional for everyone involved, but they had also demonstrated that family bonds could survive even fundamental disagreements about duty and responsibility. Charles had gradually come to appreciate his son's choice, particularly as he watched how much happier his grandchildren seemed in their new life. The couple's marriage had strengthened in ways they hadn't anticipated. Freed from the constant pressure of public scrutiny and official obligations, they had rediscovered the friendship and mutual support that had formed the foundation of their relationship. Their love story, which had once seemed like a fairy tale, had evolved into something more real and sustainable. Financial stability had taken time to achieve, but both William and Catherine had found meaningful work that supported their family while allowing them to contribute to causes they cared about. Their standard of living was modest compared to their royal years, but they often remarked to friends that they had never been happier or felt more fulfilled. The quiet evening conversations that had once been filled with official briefings and constitutional concerns now focused on homework help, weekend plans, and the simple pleasure of being together without the weight of institutional expectations. These ordinary family moments represented everything they had sacrificed their royal roles to protect and nurture. Public appearances were now rare and entirely voluntary, usually connected to charitable causes they supported privately. When they did appear publicly, the relaxation in their demeanor was obvious to anyone who had followed their royal years. They seemed more natural, more genuinely themselves, freed from the careful choreography that had defined their previous public life. The decision that had once seemed impossible and heartbreaking had led to a life that felt more authentic and sustainable than anything they had experienced during their royal years. Their love story had required sacrificing a crown, but it had gained something more precious, the freedom to be genuine with each other and their children. As they tucked their children into bed in their comfortable but unremarkable house, William and Catherine often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The titles were gone, the official roles had ended, and the constitutional obligations had been transferred to others. But their love for each other and their children had not only survived but flourished. Their quiet farewell to royal life had indeed brought millions to tears, but those tears had been followed by admiration for a couple brave enough to choose love over duty, family over obligation, and authenticity over expectation. In a world that often demanded impossible sacrifices from public figures, they had shown that sometimes the greatest service to others is the courage to be true to yourself.